Welcome to Sean's Ships, and I'd like to show you the Queen of Nanaimo today. She's my very first big ship, and I'll tell you a little bit about the ship, and if you want to know more about the ship itself, you can find lots on YouTube. But this is a Burnaby class ferry from the British Columbia West Coast. The original ship was built in 1964 and was just recently retired in 2017. A very long career for a saltwater vessel, and very well known and loved ship on Vancouver Island and the mainland. The model itself is 8 feet 10 and 3/4 inches long, and she measures 19 1/4 inches across her main deck. She weighs 130 pounds at draft, so when she's in the water she has to weigh about 130 pounds, 125 to 130 pounds. There is plenty of battery in that, but there's a lot of hull and superstructure weight as well. The hull weight is about 45 pounds, and the superstructure weight's about 35 pounds. So the rest of that is batteries and ballast. And I'm not big on ballast, so if we can put more battery in, all the better. As it is, battery will last something like 20 hours in regular running, so there's no issue with power. That's a good thing about a model ship over a model airplane or a model anything else, is that you can just load up with batteries and you have plenty of time to play. So the model is of her in about 1973. The actual ship changed from she was launched in 1964, and in 1973 they actually cut her in half and put 82 feet in her midsection. So in that time they actually split the ship here and then added this section, which is on the model about 22 1/4 inches. I just built it as one piece, of course, out of a single mold, and built it as the long ship. That's what she was most of her career. So the original ships actually were in this livery. The ship actually wore 3 different liveries throughout its lifetime. This is the first one, the classic blue and white original BC Ferries livery. The next one was brought around in 1986 for Expo, and I've done her sister in that scheme as of the 1990s. And then more modern, they went to a complete white scheme and the big BC Ferries logo in the middle. And I just didn't feel that the ship looked good in that. I actually originally did her in the new logo and pure white, and it looked more like a bathtub than a ship. And that wasn't very satisfying, so I went back to the original livery, and I find it really the most pretty out of all 3 for the classic ships. The new ships look great in the new livery, and the old ships look good in the old livery. So building a model of this size is challenging in some ways and easy in other ways. But you really need to work on some methods and processes, because the sheer scope can be overwhelming at times. So building the hull was actually kind of the first step in it. The hull is all fiberglass. The superstructure is all sheet aluminum. Building the hull was a case of making a master plug, actual size, out of plaster and drywall compound, and basically carving it to shape. And there was a lot of unexciting time in that to get all of the form correct. And I found that this model in particular was very difficult to do. I didn't estimate that it would be that difficult, but it actually contains three hull forms. You have a traditional hull form on the bottom, like a regular ship. You have this car deck flare that runs completely around the ship, and then you have this part of the car deck on top, and they're three completely different shapes, whereas a regular hull is just one continuous shape. So that took a lot longer than I expected. But once done, all of that plaster was actually sealed and painted, and that plug was then put waxed well and given a mold release, PVA actually, and I pulled a mold off of it, two sides, split right down the middle. And that way I could make any number of hulls I wanted to and not worry about mistakes, because laying up a big piece of fiberglass, you can get air, you can get just things go off too soon and it doesn't work right. And the mold, you can do another one and do another one and do another one. The mold was set up actually that it's all parallel in the middle, and I can actually make a short ship with it if I wanted to, which at the present moment I don't, because I've already got to. But in essence, building the hull 8.5 feet, 8 foot 10 3/4 long, is really like making a canoe. It's exactly the same as if you were making a kayak or a canoe. That you do a fiberglass layup inside of the mold and then pull it out. Then you have to finish it. It got fully sanded and it's painted in automotive 2K. So once the hull was actually finished, we have to put a superstructure on top. All of the superstructure was taken from the original plans. I asked BC Ferries many years ago for a set of plans, and they wonderfully obliged, and I am very thankful to them for doing that, because doing a model without plans can be worse than miserable and inaccurate. And I'm a stickler for accuracy. So working off the plans, I basically redrew everything into the computer. I redrew it in CorelDRAW at the time. I use different CAD now. And was able to take the original plans and scale them correctly to builder scale. At that point, it was very simple to make tool paths of them and get them machine cut. I'm fortunate in that now I actually have a full-size router table that can easily cut aluminum. At the time, I borrowed a friend's and cut aluminum. So I found aluminum was a really excellent material. It's all made out of 060 aluminum 5052. And it's corrosion resistant, it's fairly rigid, and gives a very good, easy material to actually assemble because it stays straight. You can make it bend and roll it into curves and stuff, that it will actually hold the bends quite well as well. So taking that, it basically made a gigantic model kit. At that point, I painted it with, again, automotive 2K acrylic urethanes and assembled it after it was painted. Nowadays, what I prefer to do is get the whole works powder coated, and it's more durable, it's cheaper, it's much less work, and it is a beautiful finish. So the color to go with for a ship is XP white, because it's the brightest white possible, and on a model it looks by far the best. You don't want muddy colors on a model. So putting it together was largely a case of making your own directions and putting it together like a gigantic model kit. The only difference being the adhesives. The only thing that really works on aluminum or a powder coated substance is the same adhesives they use to glue body panels onto cars. I used a Fuser product, and I've also used ITW Plexus's MA425. They both smell terrible, but they are tremendously strong, have some flexibility to them, and are absolutely tenacious. And that's really what you want. You don't want stuff falling apart. And you don't want to use cyanoacrylate on larger areas. It's too brittle, it'll crack, and when it cracks, it just shears right off, and you literally come apart at the seams. The body panel adhesive is crash rated in cars. Manufacturers actually use it, so it's just wonderful stuff. And it comes in different times. You can get very fast, like 10-minute, 40-minute, multiple hour times. So you can gear that. The only, I guess, issue with it is expensive. It's about $100 a tube, and you just got to get over it, because a tube will last quite a while, even on a big model like this. So the superstructure is all aluminum. Then a lot of the details we did in urethane castings, and that's probably where most of the time will be spent on a big model like this, is in detail. Most ships have fairly unique detail, capstans, bollards, chutes. They're not generic. Most ships have them actually made and cast at the shipyard they're built at, and they all look different. So if you really want them well detailed, you're going to have a bit of time making those fittings. For me, not too much of a problem. I'm familiar with the process. Very quick run through of the process is that you basically have a master. Like, for instance, for the bollard, which is a very simple one, the master was actually made out of brass, two pieces cut out on a lathe very carefully, put onto a piece of brass plate, and then soldered together. And that one master then gave me the ability to make the mold for it. So thereon, you put the two sides together, pour a 3-minute urethane casting compound in there, and pop out bollards. So every 5 minutes or so, you're popping out a new bollard. So once you're there, it becomes easy. One recommendation that I know a lot of people do this molding work. There's lots more detail on YouTube about it. I don't have to go into it here. But if you're using a silicone mold compound, which is the cheapest and sometimes the nicest, they over time will actually warp if you store them. And for older molds, they will actually become useless if you are not very careful about how they're stored. But a really, really simple way to store a silicone mold over time is, when you're finishing up with it, just pour one last casting into it and leave it, and it will actually glue it together, and then it holds its shape. So if you ever want to use it again, you pop out the one that's been in there and start casting again, and the mold will be good. Nothing more disappointing than have a mold go wrong. So many, many, many parts on the ship were done with this casting process: bollards, capstans, everything else, even the life raft and life jacket boxes, the cranes, and all of the seats. So being a ferry, there's lots of seats. The outdoor sun decks all had a particular seat, and then the interior chairs are a bit different. In total, about 1,250 seats, and I don't know, 60 or 80 tables in the cafeteria. So lots and lots and lots of seats and tables and chairs. But again, using the molding process, you kind of ramp up to be able to produce large numbers. And like I said, like how I started this was with one little chair. I carved out one little chair and made a mold of it. And then I made a whole bunch of those and glued them together into a line of one chairs. And then I made a mold of that and made several lines of chairs, and then made a mold of several lines of chairs, and voila, 1,250 chairs later, we have a ferry. Not the most exciting, but once you're rolling with it, it goes fairly quick. And again, it's important to kind of expect that some of that work lay ahead if you're ever considering building a ship. And it depends on detail. A lot of big RCs don't have a lot of interior detail, and this one does. It's fully detailed throughout, everything except for this area, which on the real ship were staterooms, and I just drew the curtains instead of detailing in there. So inside details, mostly resin cast seats, a few other pieces and bits, but being a ferry, there's not a lot of elegant detail, no dining rooms, no nothing really fancy. So on the outside, detailing it, a lot of brass work, other than the urethane castings which just went over. The railings are all actually brass. They're cut out of 020 hard brass sheet, again with a CNC router. A lot of people now are getting a little CNC router, run it on Mach 3, and that's perfect for a hobbyist. Bigger machines like that allowed me to actually make really long pieces of railing in one go. Critical thing with doing very thin brass and stuff, and I might make a separate video on actually doing that, it's actually difficult to do, it's difficult to hold down, and it's very particular about your tool pathing, because you go the wrong way, it'll actually draw a very, very thin piece into the tool. So I'll describe that possibly in another video. But the brass railings are absolutely magnificent because you can copy the real ship right down to the wire. And ship's railings are different than your store-bought hobby store, Plastruct and etc. railings, because they're a more of a generic railing. Ships usually have 3 lines of railings, and the generic one has 1, and it just looks funny and cheesy. So railings are something on a ship that seem to attract a lot of attention. People like to look at the railings, and you know, and it really does add a level of detail that's appreciated. So other bits and pieces like the benches and mostly just the benches on this ship, and the ladders were done out of brass. They're actually cut out of brass as well. So that's the main methods. Life jacket boxes, life raft boxes were actually cast in resin on this, as were the lifeboats and the davits. And the lifeboats, again, one master made a mold of it, and they were slip cast, which is a little bit different. They're not solid. You basically take the mold, you pour resin in it, and you keep rolling it until it stops sloshing, and give it another minute or 2 more, and you come out with a hollow lifeboat, which is nice and light. If you're building a ship for radio control, it's not as bad as an airplane, but you have to watch your weight. And all the detail in a ship is up high, so the more detail you get, the more top heavy they become. And that's why having lots of batteries and ballast is really necessary, and to get it as far down into the hull as you can to compensate for all of this weight up top. It may not look like much, but it does kind of work in scale. The actual walls on this are 060 aluminum. It's just 60 thousandths of an inch thick. But if in miniature, what that equates to is the real ship having 3-inch solid plate walls, which they aren't. They're only probably 3/8 plate steel, whereas 3-inch aluminum would actually, in proportion, weigh more than the real walls on the real ship. So you have to be careful with that, and lots of glue and lots of resin, lots of details, and lots of brass can add weight very, very quickly. So be careful with that and always be mindful of it. So the more weight down below, the more steady the ship. So overall, I guess one thing to point out is the funnel. The funnel is actually made out of aluminum as well, but it's only made out of 020 to give it that wonderful amount of bending. And as it is, you bend it around a pipe or something to de-stress it, and then there's a framework inside that's all glued to the unit. Final details of the ship to make it look right, other than paint, are decals. Traditional vinyl cut. This is just a 3M material that's been cut into strips because it's not available as pinstriping or anything. But to get to know probably a sign shop is good for a couple of reasons. Decals really add the final touch to the ship. On this ship, the doors are decals, all of the signage, of course, custom-made decals. Her stripes and her funnel logo are all decals. And the actual files for that, I went and got pictures of the signage on the real ship. I got a few good pictures of the old livery and copied the dogwood flag logo, and went to my local sign guy with a file in hand and said, could you print this? And today we are blessed with the ability to have a professional sign maker put the necessary stuff onto a very high quality material that won't flake off. It's water resistant. So if it does get wet, it doesn't care. It's the same decal material that would go on a car or truck. So a lot of sign companies have very, very high resolutions on their printers. If you ask for it, they will do it. And since you're not doing very much, they don't mind. But you can get signage that is absolutely minuscule and still readable with a magnifying glass, which is totally awesome. The other thing your sign company friends might be able to do for you is help you with the windows and how to get the windows on. They are an excellent source for two things: very thin double-sided tape and acetate is what it's called. Acetate is a very thin, clear plastic. Not all sign companies will carry it anymore. Some do, some don't. The other place you can get it is Staples. It's used for page covers. And the process to put your windows in is really quite simple. Using a very thin, clear, double-sided tape, you roll it onto the back of the wall, roll it down, and a small roller is necessary. I'll get into why. Then you take your strip of acetate along the windows, pull off your back sheet of the tape, and put the layer of acetate down. When you put your acetate down, do not rub it with your hands. This is where you have to put something over it, even a piece of very low tack masking tape or something, and roll it onto the double-sided tape, because acetate is soft and it will scratch very, very easily. So if you want to keep the windows clear, try not to touch it. So acetate makes very, very good windows. It's also light, but in some instances you can get very thin polycarbonate. It's also flexible, so doing curved windows in the bridge and the lounge was relatively simple. So I think generally we have covered how, in a big sense, the ship's built. And yes, in the coming videos I will go over her sister, her big sister. Nanaimo was the sixth of 7 sisters built, and the New Westminster was the 7th of 7 sisters built. And in a future video I will go over some of the further details that I was able to add into the New Westminster when I built her, with much more interior detail, lighting, and some other goodies. So thank you for watching. I hope you found it reasonably interesting. Thank you very much.